All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today is episode 48, and we're going to be talking about how to avoid 5 common Skype for Business deployment pitfalls. I'm your host today. My name is Delanda Coleman, and I'm also joined by a very, very special guest. Today we have Tom Arbuthnot from Modality Systems. He is a principal solutions architect and a UC specialist at Modality Systems. He's also a Microsoft certified master in the communications space. He's also one of our most valuable professionals, and he's a UC blogger. He speaks at all of our events. If you've been with us a long time, we've had the Link conference a few years ago. He's been a key speaker there. He's also been a key speaker at Ignite and our Tech Ed conferences, and he also co-runs the UC user group in London. So it's fair for me to say that we have the Superman of unified communications joining us today. Hey, Tom.
Hey, Delanda. Yeah, I don't know about Superman, but thanks for having me on the show. So, certainly a little bit over-enthusiastic, I would say, yes.
Yes, it's so good to have you today. You know, we've worked together in the past, and I thought it'd be a really great idea to come and bring you on just to kind of talk about your experience. So how about you give a little background about what you do and in your day-to-day?
Sure. So I'm principal solutions architect for Modality. So we're a global service provider focused around Office 365 and Skype for Business. My job is working with our customers all over the world to ensure they have Skype for Business success, really. And I guess the idea we came up with here for the broadcast was that we see a lot of things in the field. So it's an opportunity to discuss the real world, the pitfalls we see, and how we either avoid them or overcome them.
Yeah, that's great. So before we get into that, I'd love to understand, how did you even get into the unified communication?
Yeah, how did I get in space? So I did a business degree, but I was always very interested in technology. So I deliberately did a business degree just to kind of expand my wings a bit. But as soon as I finished with that, I was straight back to technology. Originally, I worked for a Cisco partner, one of the first 10 to deploy call manager, as it was then, communications manager. So I grew up on IPT and networks, like old school stuff. But I saw when I was working there, I started doing Exchange integrations, I started doing OCS, and I felt like the way forward was software-based communications and particularly OCS Link. So yeah, I came to work for Modality Systems, who were a top player in the space, and been there about 7 years now. So time flies when you're having fun.
So 7 years ago, did you see some trend or did you have some insight to make you switch from doing Cisco to 100% Microsoft?
Yeah, it was right around the time between OCS and Link 2010. Like Link 2010 was like, this is a proper credible phone system. We started doing like rip and replace of Cisco for Link, and at that point I was like, the innovation is in the software client, in the working from anywhere, not in the IP phones and the old world. So yeah, they just drew me in. Awesome.
So do you think 7 years later your hunch played out?
Yeah, I'd say so. What it did for me, certainly. I've got to do some really projects from kind of tens of thousands of users to 60,000, 100,000 at the high end. So certainly, like for me, but just in the market as well. Yeah, I think particularly now with Office 365, Skype for Business is the de facto comms platform for a lot of enterprises. So yeah, I'm happy with where I am.
All right, cool. Well, let's start getting into the deployment pitfalls. But before we do, I'd love to just understand, when customers call you, why exactly are they calling you, and what do you do for them?
Yeah, so Modality Systems are global, so we do everything right from the very early stages of strategy and business requirements and justifying projects, all the way through to deploy, run, support, manage. So every facet of unified communications really, and not just core Skype, but gateways, recording, the ecosystem as well. Some projects we get to do right from strategy to global deployment. More often than not, the customer's done some work or another partner's done some work, or we just jump in at certain parts of the project. So you see lots, and you see lots of different pitfalls and many non-technical ones as well, which we'll talk about today. So it's not all about nailing the technology. That's important, but it's more than that, which we'll talk about.
Here when you're dealing with these customers?
So I deal with them from right from strategy through to hands-on stuff.
Oh, so you deal with them from strategy from all the way through the end implementation?
Yeah, my role now is more strategic and architecture than it was hands-on, but I've deployed gateways in, I think, every continent, if not quite a few countries. So yeah, I've done the hands-on piece as well.
Okay, cool. So when you go into these customers, tell me what is the top and most common thing that you hear from them, or deployment pitfall?
Yeah, so I guess let's drive the slide forward. So the number one is not a technical one for me, and it's the business engagement and sponsorship. So we see lots of these projects driven by IT, and it's an exciting technology. You're giving the business new abilities. So quite often, whereas like an Exchange upgrade, it's like email for email. Exchange team, don't kill me, but you're quite often doing replacement. Whereas with our technology, quite often we're giving people instant messaging, we're giving people easy web conferencing, we're giving them video. So it's new stuff. So IT are quite keen. But sometimes they don't get the business engagement and the business sponsorship at the right level. It's like, we'll try and deploy it and the business will understand and they'll absorb it, but that doesn't often happen. So I've done projects where that has been the strategy and they've worked out, but they've taken many years for kind of the fire to light and really take off. Whereas other projects, so an example, a big professional services company, very top level strategy. We're moving off of Mitel and we're moving to Skype for Business, and it's the strategy and it's going to save us $1 million and this, that, and the other. And they moved 14,000 users in 15.5 weeks. So just a really, lined up strategy we're going to change. And that was all down to having the right level of sponsorship, the right level of engagement with the business understanding what they're getting for their kind of pain of transition, if you like.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that the fact that they can move that quickly once they're on board versus it coming from behind and it's from IT and it's a lot harder to make the transition. Do you see the role of an IT professional in this space changing?
Yeah, definitely. And I think even more so with the cloud, like less of the kind of lower level server patching, topology stuff exists. There's still some stuff of that there, but I think the future of IT professionals is helping the business understand how they can get value out of their technology, not just deploying it. So this business engagement, being able to talk technology and being able to talk business is such an important skill as we move more towards kind of cloud and evergreen and constantly changing technology.
Yes. I totally agree. I've been seeing that as I talk to customers, a lot of them are asking us to help sell in the value and really understand the high level activities that need to be done, especially as they transition to the cloud. So now that you've gotten the business buy-in, what do you see as the next frontier as a challenge?
Yeah, so this is it's a hard one actually. So start with the easy wins. You get excited about Skype for Business, and absolutely it can replace your entire PBX, and you can do some amazing things with it. From nothing to replacing your PBX is a decent project. It can be done, absolutely. We've done it a number of times, but there's nothing wrong with starting with easy wins. So don't feel like you need to go from no Skype for Business to ripping out your PBX in one project. There's a lot of incremental business value in just getting instant messaging and presence out there. If the business doesn't have any real-time instant messaging and presence, like for us that live with Skype for Business, that sounds like a really small noddy project, but actually going from no IM to IM is a massive jump. And another one that commonly gets brushed over is PSTN conferencing. So I've seen entire projects ROI based on getting rid of other PSTN conferencing platforms and moving to Skype for Business. So as technologists and as people who love Skype for Business, we're usually straight in there saying, let's get rid of this Mitel, let's get rid of this Avaya, and that does save a bunch of money. But those are more complex projects than just displacing conferencing as a starting point. And then once you've had those wins, the business understands what Skype is, it's much easier to then replace their traditional phone system with Skype.
Yeah, you definitely want to start with the easy activities first. Now, in my career in unified communications, I've always heard that network is the big issue. So talk to me a little bit about how and why the network is so important. What are some of the issues that people get into in deployment?
Yeah, networks is a big one. Obviously, pretty much everything we do on Skype for Business, our voice, our video, our instant messaging is going over the network. And as we move to cloud, that's going over internet and to cloud services. And so the network takes a lot of heat for everything that goes wrong, and that's not always the case, but certainly it is a fundamental building block of a successful Skype for Business project. So something we do a lot of at Modality Systems is what we call impact assessments or network assessments. And those are where before a customer deploys, we run real Skype calls across the network, in and out of the network, to understand how the network will actually perform. And that's so important. So without doing that, you don't know. And the thing we see a lot of is network teams saying we've got a gig of bandwidth, it'll be fine. Like, we've got more bandwidth than we can ever need. And it's not just about bandwidth. It's about firewalls, it's about proxies, it's about port ranges. All these things can trip you up and impact audio quality, video quality, conferencing quality, and that impacts your users, and then that starts to create a negative association with Skype for Business. So networks is a foundational component of a successful project and a foundational component of like a quality Skype for Business experience.
I'm curious, do you have any examples of the types of things that have changed over time with the network? So go ahead. Yeah, so for example, like I'm imagine they deploy IMM presence, they gradually move into other conferencing workloads, and then they turn on video and then it crashes.
Yeah, sometimes it happens like that. And what often happens is, again, going back to that kind of incremental deployment, you deploy Skype for Business for 200 users, IT start using it, and it works great. And then you get to like IT friends and family, and you're at 500, and then you're at 1,000, and everything is solid. And at some point, you hit a concurrent capacity where something on the network doesn't hold up, and it's often a web proxy or some kind of proxy that does inspection that just can't deal with the raw throughput, or it's a firewall that has port exhaustion, so there's just too many sessions trying to go through it concurrently, and that's a real challenge because you've got your business excited about a technology and then it starts getting unreliable. And its network fixes are not quick typically, you're talking weeks at best. So it's very difficult to then say, no, you can't have this technology yet because we can have it, but we're just at the limit. That's very hard for a business to understand. So network impact assessment for us is a one-time load test, but we also run those tests on an ongoing basis. So we have those we call test nodes making Skype calls continuously running in a lot of our customers, and they're kind of like the canary in the coal mine to check everything is still performing and see when we're hitting the edge.
Yeah, I'm curious. So in the example that you talked about, when you have 14,000 users make the migration in, a few weeks or a few months, how do they get their network ready and then continue to have it work?
Yeah, so lots of testing ahead of time to make sure you're ready for that load. So that's really important. Like, and if you look at the Skype operations framework, which is like Microsoft's best practices for doing Skype for Business, great content in that. That says that it mandates you have some kind of network assessment. So doing that test up front is really important. But then monitoring during rollout is really key. So you want to see how things are performing as you incrementally add load. And look for things like your peak hours. So typically 9 o'clock and 2 o'clock, everybody jumps on a conference because there's a conference at the start of the day and a conference at the start of the afternoon. Everybody, funny enough, we've seen this in multiple customers, over lunchtime, everybody jumps onto Netflix or YouTube, big peak on the network load. Yeah, it's really funny. You can literally see it on the diagram. It's like quiet lunchtime. And there's some good tooling natively to look at that stuff. So in SfBO and SfBS, you've got Call Quality Diagnostics, CQD, and you've got Call Analytics, and those can show you the performance of your environment. Beyond that, Modality pull all that data into what we call Skype Business Diagnostics. So we pull it into a big SQL data warehouse, either on-prem or in Azure, and we use Power BI to slice and dice it. And that gives us a new level of power. We're leveraging kind of the power of SQL and the power of Azure. We're leveraging the Power BI to analyze and visualize that stuff, and that we find super useful, just because the ability to slice and dice from a complete overall view of how the environment's performing down to specific sites, specific users, specific clients, and try and drill in and find out what the issues are.
Yeah, that's a good transition to your next point. So we've had business sponsorship, we've started with the easy wins, and we also have the network being monitored and tested appropriately. What's next in the journey?
Yeah, so now we've said it's all the network's fault. It really isn't all the network's fault. So that's a common pitfall in itself. Like, Skype's not working, I bet it's networks. And sometimes it is, but definitely not always. And client devices, kind of in commerce, client devices, often get forgotten. So when we're talking about client devices, we're talking about, obviously, a lot of Skype business users are on PCs, they're on Macs, so they have those machines, they have their USB devices. We've also got IP phones, so we've got physical IP phones for desks, we've got conference phones. And what we find in Skype business projects is everybody knows the right thing to do with these. Like, keep them patched, keep them current, keep them looked after. But usually the desktop team who own the desktop, own the Office deployment, are not necessarily part of the Skype for Business deployment team. And at Modality, we try and take a view of projects where we want there to be representatives responsible for the success of Skype across the technical teams. So obviously we have servers, we have networks involved, we have the client devices people involved, because we want everybody to pull for success. It's no good that the people who are looked after Skype for Business as a service say, well, the service is great, but the desktop team just aren't patching the client. That's why you're having issues. Business user, I don't care. Like, I don't care whether it's the service or the desktop or the firmware on the IP phone. I just want my solution to work. So if you want Skype for Business to be a success, you need to make ensuring client devices are working properly part of your strategy.
Yeah. Do you recommend an organization standardizing on a particular client?
I mean, certainly patching levels for the clients is important. So keeping things patched to current is really, really important. The interesting thing is some customers have very rigid standards about their desktop or their Mac version. That potentially makes their life easier, because sometimes we see issues around wireless drivers, we see issues around headset firmware not getting on with certain docks, for example. So certainly if you have less variables in play, like you standardize on a set number of headsets and a set number of machines, you've got less variables in play. You can know that you've got X Plantronic headsets and Y Jabra headsets, and you need to firmware patch them every year, every quarter, whatever you decide to do. If you let everybody go free for all on their devices, you're pushing a lot of options out there in terms of patching and understanding them. So it's good, but countering that, the way of technology these days is a lot more user selection. So what this often comes down to is if you have got an environment where people are allowed to choose their own PC, they're allowed to choose their own headset, you want to at least push them towards certified headsets, and then you want to keep an eye on how those are performing, and we'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah, we certainly have a portfolio of certified devices from a range of partners and a range of price points that they can participate in.
Yeah, definitely, and I think it's important to know that as well. Again, another business engagement element is a lot of business people or even technical people won't remember that common area phones are important, that IP phones have a place. You know, we're all software first, we're all on our laptops, we love our headsets, but you've got to let the project know and the business know. If they have a use case where a PA wants a physical phone, absolutely we can cater for that. If you want a star phone in a room, we have that covered. So quite often people forget that Skype for Business, particularly in PBX replacement, we're all excited about software clients, we're excited about our iOS and our Android clients, but the business need to understand this is a proper phone system with proper phones where you need them.
Now talk about CQD and how you guys use that to detect which hardware are having problems.
Yeah, so that's really, really powerful. So particularly in the environment where you have lots of different devices, you've got CQD and you've got Call Analytics, and those are both native Microsoft tools that can pull out how devices are performing. For example, how is the Dell with this wireless driver performing? Those are good, and those are definitely the first place to look for people who are watching this broadcast and want to have a look at their performance, particularly CQD. If you're in Office 365 in Skype Business Online, it's quite powerful. With our diagnostics product, again, we kind of take that to the next level. We pull that data raw from Skype Business Online or from Skype Business Server, and we use Power BI to slice and dice it to understand which client versions are performing better than others, how many client versions are there in play, and what patch levels are they at. So as much as I said, having the desktop team in board as part of the virtual Skype team is important. If you can't get that level of engagement, you can use the tools and the reporting to make sure they're doing the things they need to do for your success. So one example is we had a customer with 14 different versions of the Mac client in play globally. 60,000 user customer, big customer, lots of noise from Mac users. And when we looked at our Power BI reports, like, well, you know, teams around the world are arbitrarily patching, not patching. So we got them all up to current patch levels, and a lot of the noise died down because they were just bugs that had already been fixed. But, you know, nobody was taking responsibility for patching those client versions.
And how long does it typically take to patch all of those different clients? Is that a project in of itself?
Yeah, I mean, for Windows and desktop team, it's usually pretty easy because it's automated. So if they're on Office Click to Run, the kind of new version of Office, they're potentially getting those updates direct from the cloud. If they're on the older MSI version of Office, there's usually a team that's responsible for making sense of those patches and pushing them out. On Mac, there are tools that push it as well, but quite often Mac users are less catered for in that area. So Mac's a point to look at. If you've got lots of Macs, make sure somebody's maintaining those client versions.
Okay, that's good advice. All right, so we know that this environment is not static, so there's lots of networks, issues, or things that you should be watching out for, as well as many different client devices that you should be considering. How do you stay on top of all of this? You kind of alluded to it before with the reporting, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, this is my fifth one, and this is definitely the most neglected one, is planning for user adoption and using the reporting for user adoption. So we've talked about using reporting for troubleshooting, you know, finding out what client versions are working and which aren't. But don't forget, as a Skype for Business project or stream or team, you need to play back into the business how you're getting value out of the platform, how it's being used. So there's a few reports natively that tell you the usage on the Office 365 portal or on the SQL reporting services if you've got server. Microsoft just came out with a Power BI reporting pack for all of Office 365, which has a lot of Skype metrics on, but we don't see much of IT teams going back to the business and saying, did you know you did 1 million IMs last month? Did you know that we did X thousand minutes of video today? That stuff, we see it as the project, know it's happening. It gets lost in the shuffle with the business. So spending time looking at how your system is being used, both to kind of push the good news into the business and also to look for areas for improvement. So if you see videos being used a lot for sales in North America, but it's not being used in Europe, what's the disconnect there? Is it that certain users in Europe are not comfortable with video? Is it that their performance is not good and we have to fix something? Do we need to do some targeted training? There's lots of value in continuously looking at the reporting.
That's good. We just got a question, and the question is, how can a user's or how can the IT team really look at configuration drift?
Yeah, that's a real pain point, and it's a pain point across the stack. So networks and devices, you do your project and you make sure everything is nailed on, everything is up to date, and then there's not a project, it goes into kind of maintenance operations mode, and you need to make sure that continues. So on the networks, you keep looking at your CQD and your core analytics, and again with our diagnostics product, we continuously run test Skype calls all around the world, so node to node, checking performance. And what you're looking for is changes in trends. So you're not looking for one user having one bad call, particularly at the scale of thousands of users, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of users in some of our customers. What we're looking for is changes in trends, either kind of in the negative, like call quality has gone down by 2% between this site and this site. They're still in an okay threshold, but that's a warning sign. What you don't want to do as a project is get to the point where configuration drift has caught you out and you haven't realized. So you have to keep looking at that reporting and have to keep ongoing maintenance to make sure everything's performing.
Yeah, so that raises a great point. I think dashboards are really helpful for you to see that, so you can see the trends. Tell me, you talked about a threshold. What is the acceptable threshold?
Yeah, so Microsoft have a really good TechNet article, actually. If you Bing for it, it's network requirements for Skype for Business, and that will tell you Microsoft's recommended, or actually required, I believe the language is, thresholds for performance. So packet loss, jitter, latency, round trip time. You don't want to be going over those thresholds. So when we talk about thresholds, they're what we're talking about. We're looking for calls or test calls in our scenarios that are breaching those thresholds. That indicates we've got an issue we need to look at.
Okay. Another question that we have is, how can you deal with a cultural change in an organization?
Yeah, cultural change is big, and we talk about the kind of digital transformation and new ways of working, and that's almost the harder project. Like, to be honest, when we talk about Skype for Business, I tend to say the technology is pretty easy. Like not easy to get done always because of process and politics and designs, but it works. Like, I can take you to customers with tens of thousands of seats of this stuff. It works. I know how to make it work, but getting your users to use it is not as simple as that. You're talking about culture there, you're talking about kind of internal business sponsorship. So we spend a disproportionate amount of time looking at user adoption, profiling users to see how we can best train them and best support them in kind of changing technologies, and this continuous looking at the reporting and supporting them. So saying, you've had Skype for Business for 3 months now, you haven't used a lot of conferencing, it looks like, from the stats. Would you like some conference training? You've got the basics, you're using it as your phone, but maybe you want a bit more support on conferencing. And that is not a one-time thing. That is continuously supporting the business with the change.
We have another question about network assessments, and one of our listeners would like to understand a little bit detail. How does that actually look like?
Yeah, so network assessment is really, really key. What it looks like is spending some time understanding what your end deployment goal is. So how many users you're going to have on each site, how many video calls they're going to make, how many audio calls, how many conferences. We take that and we do two things. We put it through an Excel bandwidth calculator to understand what theoretically the bandwidth is required, and then we can talk to the network team and say, look, do you have enough? If you've got a 10 meg link and we're forecasting in Excel you're going to need 15 meg for your peak capacity, then we're already at a disadvantage there. We need something to be done. If we pass the Excel and everything looks good on paper, that's when we move to an actual load test network assessment. So we run our Skype business test nodes, we make the same amount of test calls as we would expect in production, and we can literally see real Skype calls being made from London to Paris. Let's do 50 calls because that's our peak load, and we continue that load running 24/7, usually for a month. So in agreement with the network team, we put that, and the reason to do it over time is we don't want to just do a test for a day or for half an hour. We want to see what other impacts there are in the business that impact our call quality. So that's how we catch on Fridays, everybody is supposed to work in the office. So Friday, the entire sales team come and work in the office and the load goes higher. Or on Tuesday, everybody has some reason to do an accounting thing that pulls a big file from the central server to their desktops. So it's really important to do a real load test and do that test over time, not at just a point in time.
Good point. Well, we're getting towards the end, and I'd love to just recap some of the pitfalls that you covered today.
Yeah, definitely. So I've got a bit of summary slide here. So again, we're kind of considering the technology as a given in this. Like, you've got to have your servers right, you've got to have your topology right, but those things are very well documented and easy to do. These are the pitfalls that are likely to catch you out. So making sure you've got that business sponsorship and engagement, real business users that are helping you understand their requirements, that are supporting the change, that are engaged in the project. Don't be afraid to take easy wins. Don't feel like you have to go from your Mitel PBX to Skype for Business for PSTN voice globally as the first phase of your project. It's absolutely acceptable and even preferable sometimes to take some time and presence, get conferencing going, get everybody comfortable, then rip the first PBX out, then rip the next PBX out. So easy wins are absolutely a good thing to do. And next, we talked about network requirements. So network is a foundational component of our success. If the network isn't right, then Skype for Business isn't going to be right. So looking at network assessments, looking at the Skype operations framework best practices, and making sure you're not doing one-time testing there. You're testing continuously and you're monitoring continuously. So when the firewall port range changes arbitrarily, you catch that. When an office employs 50 more people and goes over the bandwidth limit, you catch that. So not a one-time event. Client devices, so we're talking PCs, Macs, phones, USB devices, iOS and Android. You need to make sure those are all being looked after, they're patched to current, they're performing the way you want. And don't forget, with IP phones and with USB devices, quite often there's firmware patches to do ever so often there. So those things can get forgotten because they're not Office, they're somebody else's. So if you've got IP phones, make sure somebody's looking after the firmware, and if you've got USB devices, quite often those need firmware updates too. And our final point was planning for user adoption and using the reporting. This is so key. So along with our business engagement, making sure we plan and support the business in their change and get their user adoption going, and use the reports to see the trending in both call quality and performance, but also usage. Make sure that people are using the technology, and if they're not, how do we best support them? How do we train them? How do we advance the usage? So particularly kind of 1 and 2 are mainly about making the initial project a success, but 3, 4, and 5 are almost continuous requirements for the Skype service team. You know, make sure you're on top of these things, and it's a cycle of continuous improvement.
I totally agree. Yesterday, you wrote a great blog on our technical communities website. And so for those of you that are listening and that want a recap of this, you could definitely read Tom's blog. And Tom, can you share a little bit how we can hear more from you? Where can we reach you?
Yeah, so some resources to continue this conversation. So Tech communities is the place to go for engagement. So that blog Delanda mentioned, if you reply to that blog with questions and comments, I get alerted, so I'm totally happy to engage there. We've talked a couple of times about Skype Operations Framework, which are Microsoft's best practices. Partners are certified in delivering that methodology, so look to work with a partner that is Skype Operations Framework, but also end customers can get to all the same material and use it, so there's a ton of good resource there. This broadcast and all the other broadcasts are archived on YouTube, and often key information breaks in these broadcasts, so be sure to check those out on YouTube as you get time. And the diagnostics product I talked about, there's a blog post there which gives a video demo of how that works. In terms of me personally, I have a blog, tomtalks.uk. I try and keep on top of all the news and breaking stuff there, so I'm generally pretty good at having that up to date. So if you want to know what's going on, you can RSS or email subscribe or check that out. I do some Tom Talks videos where I talk to key vendors and key players in the UC industry, and I do kind of 5 minutes just up to date, catch up with what's going on. Twitter, LinkedIn, Twitter particularly, there's a fairly vibrant SfB hashtag on Twitter that you want to check out. And anything I've talked about, Modality, who I work for, modalitysystems.com is the place to go.
All right, awesome, Tom. Thank you so much for joining us today. I feel really honored to have the super UC man join us today.
It's nice to be on the broadcast. There's so many good broadcasts, and people should check out that link. It's great to be on the show. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So thanks, guys. This has been awesome. We have tons of great content on the tech community site, and so we're definitely listening to your posts, to your questions and your comments, so make sure that you keep that flowing. And we're also listening, so if you want to follow us on Twitter and post a question there, feel free to do that, and we'll get back to you. So I want to transition to what we're going to talk about next week. We have a new partner that just released a new cloud video interop service, PixEp. And so we're going to have them join us next week and talk about 3 ways of how to bring your legacy VTCs into a modern meeting. And so that will be the next topic for the next weekend. So we hope you tune in. And finally, we are listening to your feedback, and we want to hear from you. So we have posted a survey in the tech community site and given you an opportunity to win some dollars. So please give us your feedback. We're planning content not only for the video broadcast, but we're also planning content for the tech communities. And so we want to hear about you. We want to understand what you like, what you don't like, and how we can plan for the future to best equip you to be a successful Skype for Business IT professional. So with that, thank you for joining episode 48, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.